Get ready. You're about to learn what history books kept silent. Forget everything you thought you knew about the Mafia. Before the Italians seized power, before the names Al Capone and Lucky Luciano thundered across the country, New York was ruled by a different force, a brutal, merciless Irish army born from poverty. They built an empire before it was mainstream. Watch until the end, and I'll reveal the cunning plan that allowed one man to control this army of shadows, remaining untouchable by the law. This is the story of the 5 Points Gang, the true kings of the underworld, whose laws were carved with blades on the walls of the slums. Their story is more than just gangster brawls. It's a hymn to the power of the spirit, a brutal will, and the drive to claw your way out of the gutter to the very top. You will see how street kids transformed into ruthless leaders before whom the entire city trembled. They were the architects of organized crime in America, and their legacy still flows in the veins of the criminal world. Picture New York in the mid-19th century, a cauldron boiling with poverty, disease, and despair. In its very heart, in the 5 Points district, a storm was brewing. This place was so dangerous that the police were afraid to enter, even in broad daylight. Here, amidst the filth and hunger, Irish immigrants who fled the Great Famine learned a simple truth. If the law isn't on your side, you have to create your own. And so, the 5 Points Gang was born. This wasn't just a group of thugs. It was a family, bound by a shared hatred of poverty and a common dream of power. Their leader was a legend, a man whose name was whispered with both terror and admiration, Paolo Antonio Vaccarelli, better known as Paul Kelly. Italian by blood, he had an Irish heart and a devil's mind. He understood what others didn't. Brute force is nothing without strategy. Kelly wasn't just a gangster, he was a visionary. A former boxer with iron fists, he turned his gang into a true corporation. He opened boxing clubs and dance halls that served not only as fronts for his operations, but also as training grounds. Every young and hungry kid dreaming of a better life came to Kelly. He gave them food, shelter, and a purpose. In return, they gave him their loyalty and their fists. The 5 Points Gang took over everything. Rackets, protection schemes, gambling, prostitution, control over labor unions. Their methods were simple and effective. First, they offered protection. If a shop owner refused, the next day his windows would be shattered. If he persisted, his business would burn to the ground. No one dared to cross Kelly and his boys. The police were either bought or intimidated. The gang had its own code of honor, brutal but fair by their standards. Betrayal was punished by death. Loyalty was rewarded handsomely. One of the gang's most famous principles was, if they hit you with a rock, you answer with a bullet. They never forgave insults and took revenge with blood-chilling cruelty. The streets of the 5 Points became their battlefield, where the right to live was proven every single day. One of the most vivid examples of their audacity was the war with the Eastman gang, led by Monk Eastman, Paul Kelly's complete opposite. If Kelly was a strategist, Eastman was a wild beast who loved to fight for the fight's sake. Their rivalry turned the streets of New York into a bloodbath. Hundreds of gangsters from both sides clashed in vicious brawls, using brass knuckles, knives, and revolvers. Legend has it that one day, tired of the losses, Kelly and Eastman decided to settle things the old-fashioned way, with a boxing match. The fight lasted for hours. The two titans of the underworld beat each other half to death in front of their gangs. Neither could win. In the end, exhausted and bloodied, they declared a draw, but the truce was short-lived. The war erupted with new ferocity until politicians removed Eastman from the streets by sending him to prison. But the true strength of the 5 Points Gang was its ability to cultivate talent.
It was in Paul Kelly's school that future mafia legends learned their first lessons. A young and ambitious kid named Johnny Torrio, Al Capone's future mentor, sharpened his intellect here. He watched Kelly and understood that the future wasn't in street brawls, but in organization, in business.
And right beside him, another genius was rising, a guy named Alphonse Capone. Yes, that Al Capone. He started his journey as a bouncer in one of Kelly's clubs. It was here that he learned cruelty, understood how the system worked, and saw the power that money and fear could grant. He would later apply the lessons learned in the 5 Points to Chicago, building his own bloody empire. And that's not all. Among the graduates of this academy was Charles Lucky Luciano, the man who would go on to completely change the rules of the game, create the Commission, and transform chaotic gangs into what we now know as the Cosa Nostra. Luciano saw the strengths and weaknesses of Kelly's gang. He learned the most important thing: ethnic boundaries are bad for business. He realized the need to unite everyone: Irish, Jews, and Italians. The 5 Points gang was a melting pot where the characters of future bosses were forged. They were the first to understand how to manipulate politicians. During elections, Kelly's boys worked as specialists. They would storm polling stations, beat up undesirable voters, destroy ballots, and stuff the boxes with the right ones. In return, the right politicians turned a blind eye to their crimes. This was a symbiosis of power and crime that would later become the hallmark of the Mafia. Kelly created a system that worked like clockwork. Every gang member knew his place and his task. There were fighters for street wars, diplomats for negotiating with corrupt cops, and tribute collectors who held entire neighborhoods in fear. This was a true army, commanded by a single general. One story tells of how the owner of a large store refused to pay tribute. He hired security and thought he could stand up to the gang. The next night, a cart loaded with pineapples, slang for homemade bombs, pulled up to his store. After a few deafening explosions, only ruins remained. The next day, every other merchant on the block doubled their payments.
Their influence was so vast that they even controlled the New York docks. Not a single ship could be unloaded without their approval. They decided who would work and who would starve. The longshoremen's unions were completely under their thumb. This wasn't just a racket. It was control over the city's main commercial artery. They had New York by the throat. However, like any empire, the empire of the 5 Points gang could not last forever. Time moved on. Italian gangsters, watching the success of the Irish, began to form their own, more cohesive and family-based structures. They learned from Kelly's mistakes. They realized they could go further, creating not just a gang, but a secret society bound by blood ties. The era of the Italian Mafia began. Young and hungry wolves like Lucky Luciano, who saw the future in unification, began to push out the old Irish guard. They were more organized, more ruthless, and most importantly, they looked to the future. They didn't just want to rob, they wanted to build a long-term business on bootlegging, which emerged with Prohibition. Paul Kelly, the genius of his time, began to lose his grip. He had become too prominent a figure, getting drawn into legitimate business and politics. His old methods stopped working against the new wave of gangsters. His students had surpassed him. Al Capone left to build his empire in Chicago. Luciano and Torrio began creating their own families, which would soon become the dominant force. The fall of the 5 Points was inevitable. It wasn't one big war, but 1,000 small skirmishes. The Italians took businesses and streets from the Irish, one by one. They were better organized and acted as a united front. The Irish gangs, fragmented and weakened by internal conflicts, could not withstand this new, disciplined force. And here's the secret that was hidden for so long. Why did Kelly's empire collapse? It wasn't just the Italians. The secret lay with Paul Kelly himself. He had made enough money and wanted to go legit, to become a respectable businessman. He began to step back from his criminal affairs, and his army, left without its brilliant strategist, turned into a mob that was easily crushed by more organized enemies. He himself destroyed what he had created.
He traded the crown of the king of the streets for the illusion of respectability. But the streets don't forgive weakness. The legacy of the 5 Points dissolved, but it did not disappear. It became the foundation upon which Lucky Luciano and others built the American Mafia. They took Kelly's structure, his methods of control, and his idea of a criminal corporation, but removed the ethnic prejudices, creating a multinational criminal empire. The story of the 5 Points Gang is not just a tale of gangsters. It's a lesson in how empires are born and die. It's a reminder that even from the very bottom, you can rise to the top if you have the will, the mind, and a team of loyal people. They were villains, but their story is inspiring in its audacity and scale. They showed the world that rules can not only be followed, but also created. They lost, but their ideas won. Every time we hear about the Mafia, we should remember those Irish boys from the slums who first wrote this bloody play. They were the pioneers, the cruel and ruthless architects of the system that held America in fear for decades. Their legend lives on in the dark alleys of history, a reminder of what a person is capable of in the pursuit of power. And so ended the era of the Irish Kings of New York. But the story doesn't end there. This was just the beginning of the Great War for the city. Did you like the story? Do you feel that energy from the streets? Then show it. Smash that like button under the video so I know you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new legends from the criminal world. And most importantly, write in the comments what detail from the life of the 5 Points Gang struck you the most. Your opinion is very important to me. And now, listen up. If this video gets 5,000 likes, I will release a video about the most brutal and secret war in Mafia history, the Castellamares War, where brother turned against brother and the streets were flooded with blood. Are you ready to hear the rest of the story? Then get to it!